This is the new Ducati Multistrada V2, and before we get into what's new about this bike, which is pretty much everything, I'd like to share something really interesting from an Indian point of view. You see, the designer behind this motorcycle is an Indian. His name is Akshay Pardesi, and he's not just a designer, he's the lead designer behind this project, and I think that's really exciting for us Indians. Anyway, with that out of the way, let's talk about the bike. And since we started with design, well, it really keeps the Multistrada ethos, but it has been refined in every way. You've got new LED headlamps front and rear. It's a sleeker look. The motorcycle itself looks slightly trimmed down, a little more taut. It's still a big bike. It's still very much a Multistrada, but everything around it is new. And when you take a closer look, you'll start noticing things like this air intake out here. And it's not for downforce aerodynamics. Instead, it's meant to direct air from the front and through the rider's legs, and they say that helps with heat management. Heat is a particular issue with Ducatis in India. I'd love to see how this works. Unfortunately, today has been a really chilly ride. We haven't seen more than 15 degrees. It's been 7-8 degrees cold. So I can't tell you anything about the engine heat. I can tell you about the engine, but heat, not today. Ducati has also tried to incorporate into the design of this motorcycle certain elements to make it easier to service. So you can open this little plastic window out here and access the coolant reservoir. If you want to change the air filter, you don't need to take off the whole fuel tank. You can access it from the front and take the filter out. As for engine service intervals, they're not dramatically massive like the Multistrada V4 with a 60,000 kilometer valve clearance check, but this bike does run valve springs, and we're told that the entire process is now a lot easier, and you can also access the engine heads without doing too much work. So this bike should be more affordable to run, but let's get back to the more important things about what's new. Now, the design is new, but so is the engine and so is the chassis. This is a new 890cc V-twin. It's down in size compared to the old 937cc motor, but that's pretty much where the competition is today, about 900cc, so it's in the ballpark. Now, power-wise, it's slightly higher than before. It's 115 horsepower. Torque has reduced slightly, but that's not going to be really much of a problem because this motorcycle is a lot lighter than it used to be. We'll get back to that. Until then, let me show you what it sounds like. So it's very much a Ducati sound, and from the riding experience, it's very much a Ducati feel as well. You feel that motor underneath you. There is a rumble, there is a rasp, but I like the fact that this engine now sounds nicer than the old motor at lower revs. At high RPMs, the 937 sounded good, but at lower revs, it was a bit clattery and mechanical, and this one just sounds tighter, crisper. It's a good sound. Not too loud, but it is a good sound. Now, everything with this engine is new, but the character is very similar in that it's a long-legged thing. There's quite a small 40-tooth rear sprocket on the back. It's not going to be like your inline 4 and inline 3 engines where you can hold a high gear at low speeds. I think the tractability here is better than the old 937, and going around roundabouts in second, third gear in Valencia was not a problem, but you still don't want to let this engine get below 2000 RPM. That being said, the drivability is amazing. The mid-range torque on this engine is fabulous, and it seems to be an effortlessly fast motor compared to the old one. Outright performance may not be that different, but the way it rides, the way you can access that performance is a lot nicer. It feels lighter and freer revving, still very much a Ducati L-twin engine, but it feels like a more modern motor, and that's a good thing because the old 937 was really starting to feel its age. That being said, the overall riding experience is still quite familiar. It is still quite a heavy clutch, so you're going to feel that in dense, slow-moving traffic in India. It is new, it feels up-to-date, but it also feels familiar. What's the biggest difference with this bike is the amount of weight it has shed. Now, this will weigh about 215 odd kilos with the fuel tank fully filled. That's a 19-litre fuel tank. It's 1 litre less than before, but the weight savings from this bike to the old V2 are significant. It's 17 kilos lighter, and you feel that as soon as you pick it up off the stand. It is still a big and heavy motorcycle, and you are fully aware that you're on a large adventure bike, but it is more manageable, and the steering effort is also something that I felt was quite light. Now, the way Ducati has managed to save so much weight is by changing the frame itself. It's now a monocoque frame, a lot like the Multistrada V4. You still have a trellis frame for the subframe, but the front is completely different. Riding position has also improved. The seat is now slightly higher than before. The old seat was 830 mm. This one is 850 mm, but you can lower it to 830 mm. There's a lowering mechanism under the seat. You don't need to use tools. Slightly different to what BMW and Royal Enfield do, but you can lower the seat without any tools. I rode it in the 850 mm setup all day today, and I quite like that. I also feel like the riding position has improved. The old Multi was a little tight in the seat to foot peg ratio. That has improved here, and the bike is also a little more roomy. So for long hours of riding, I think this is a better riding position. You've also got a new adjustable windscreen. It's literally one finger adjustable. It's a really nice mechanism. I hope it holds up well once it gets full of dirt and dust in our conditions, but to use today, it's been really good. Wind protection itself is actually quite nice. Like I said, it's been a really chilly day out on the bike. This is not completely enveloping you and blocking out all the wind. You do feel some, but there's no buffeting, there's no uncomfortable zones. And with the windscreen up or down, I was comfortable all day long today. Comfort is one aspect of the Multistrada, but fun and sportiness is something that cannot be ignored, and this is a really fun motorcycle to ride. The bike definitely feels light and agile, and direction changes are easy. It's not an out-and-out sports bike, obviously. First of all, it has a 19-inch front wheel. Second of all, the riding position doesn't really load the front end very much. So you do need to manage the line around a corner sometimes. It does tend to want to wander slightly wide on a corner exit if you're not prepared for it. But that's if you're sitting upright. If you start leaning off and putting some effort into it, this thing handles really well. We were on some fabulous winding roads at a certain point today, and you can really attack them without the foot peg scraping, without really running into issues of cornering clearance. The brakes are good. They're the same M432 brakes as the old Multistrada. They're not superbike sharp, but they are strong. You can really push this bike quite hard around a set of corners. You'll have a lot of fun. You'll keep up with a proper sports bike, but you will also not be fooled into thinking that you are on a sports bike. This is an all-rounder. Ducati calls it a crossover. They've saved the adventure definition for the Desert X. This bike now takes more of a road definition. That's probably why we didn't ride it off-road at all today. But in general, lots of fun to ride, and it keeps you comfortable throughout. Now we are on the V2S, which gets electronically controlled suspension just like before. You can change the suspension modes independently of the riding modes. The suspension is more tunable than before. There are new riding modes as well, and each riding mode is customizable to set up what you want. There's two power modes. It drops down to 95 horsepower if you're in wet or in urban or in enduro, but it's a full 115 horsepower if you're in touring or sport. Throttle calibration is very smooth, very natural. There's in any of the modes, and I also like the fact that urban mode feels quite usable. On some of the older models, I thought urban mode was a bit too dull. You don't want to spend time in that mode, but here it felt valuable when riding through the smaller towns. It also softens up the suspension, which is nice. As for overall suspension comfort, you have 170 mm of wheel travel at both ends. That's the same as the old bike, and like the old V2, it seems to prioritize suspension control and tautness over outright softness and plushness. So you would find that a Desert X, naturally with longer suspension travel, will soak in bad roads a little better. But I'd like to bring this back home and play with the suspension modes properly to see just how comfortable it can be. In terms of features and equipment, you've got cruise control, you've got the 5-inch TFT display, which now has new display modes. It's a new layout, it's nice to use. There's revised switchgear on the left side, which also I think is an improvement over the old bike. And if you go for the V2S, then you get the Trick electronic suspension. There are a couple of features that I think should have been included at this price point. For example, you'll have to pay more if you want a center stand, and you'll have to pay more for heated grips, which was something we missed having today. Beyond that though, the Multistrada V2S is a well-equipped motorcycle. It's not an out-and-out luxury tourer. You can go for the V4 if that's what you're interested in. You don't have things like a keyless system. It's a standard key, but at this segment, that's absolutely fine. The Multistrada V2 will be coming to India sometime in the third quarter of this year, and prices will probably go up from where they're currently at. The V2 is an expensive motorcycle if you compare to the competition, but then again, it is a Ducati, and Ducatis command a premium. As for the overall riding experience, it's still very much a Ducati. You will not mistake it for any other motorcycle. And in a world where pretty much everything in this segment is moving to a parallel to an engine, I think we really have to appreciate the fact that Ducati has stuck to its roots. It's giving you a proper V-twin, which is a unique experience. There are no real surprises in terms of what you get. This is very much a Ducati motorcycle. It feels like a Multistrada should, but it elevates the entire experience. This is now a more refined, more agile, more fun to ride bike. Still very much a Ducati, but it has taken the Multistrada V2 into the future, and I think it really sets up this platform for many years to come.